Hello everyone. Today we're going to be talking about moving from Notan to blocking in. And we're going to be working on direct painting methods that take you from working in from a very simple block in to as complicated a finished painting as you wish. So to start off with, I want to talk about exactly what blocking in is. The definition of blocking in is that it's the first painting stage after the preliminary sketch or drawing. And it's where you put the colors down, lay down flat areas of color. After you block in, artists typically develop their compositions from the general to the specific, working from the background to the foreground, refining shapes, colors, textures until you decide that you've reached the state of finish that you want in your painting. So it can remain as abstract or as representational as you desire. When you start a painting by blocking in, you activate the whole picture plane from the very beginning. The entire canvas is quickly covered, and from there it can be worked up at the same rate overall. And you have the luxury of deciding whether you want to finish between a loose abstraction or a more painterly realism. So that becomes completely up to you. I want to review really quickly how you need to start a painting. So think about the things that we did in Module 1 and Module 2. Making art is about learning to see. You need to practice that art of seeing. The more you observe, the more you practice, the more you'll actually see. Your ability to see, the receptors in your brain that process the information from your eye actually grow. So literally, the more you see, the more you observe, the more you will see. Drawing and painting from observation is one of the best ways to develop those skills. So even if you want to work in an abstract, non-objective way, I would recommend that for the time that we're working in the course that you work from direct observation, because you'll see a dramatic improvement in the compositions that you're working with. Keep a sketchbook. Try making those small thumbnails that record the shape and value relationships that you see. And remember our mantra, you want to work with 3 to 5 general large shapes, 5 to 7 large shapes and 3 to 5 values. Keep those shapes very simple and without details. Assign 1 value per shape. The more you practice doing that, the easier it gets. One of the things I want you to see here is that as soon as you look at the image in grayscale and you move from color, removing that hue information, into a more grayscale image, you can begin to see how our eye tricks us so often. We think of roads as being super light. They're actually not. It's the same exact value as those trees in the distance. So remember to squint as you're looking, as we talked about in Module 2, so that you can see the true values that are there. Think about using the viewfinder that we've discussed to really be able to truly analyze those values. And if you're working from directly in front of the landscape instead of a photograph, it'll help you crop out all of those other extraneous things that you see in the landscape. So the next step is to make that thumbnail. And in this one, you can see that there are almost exactly 7 shapes. So you see a very, very dark shape. And here are the darks. Oops, sorry, on the wrong layer. You can see the dark shapes. There are three very, very dark shapes that I've rendered as almost black. Then there's a very, very light shape that is the sky. Two that are slightly darker that are the edges of the fields. And then the road, which is sort of a middle value. So think about really super simplifying in that thumbnail so that then you can see where the basic Notan is. And after doing this thumbnail, then I can assign those values that I see there that are grays to either the dark or to the light to get that basic thumbnail study established. So it's still crucial to keep doing those Notan sketches. You can do it with a marker in your sketchbook, which is what I recommend, or with paint, which is also a good idea. But for this particular exercise that we're going to be working with, I'd like for you to do it in marker in your sketchbook so that you have it to the side as a reference when we move into the exercise after the demo. So go on and get that Notan established, that Notan done in your sketchbook so that as you start to paint, you have a roadmap to follow. Look to make sure that you have either predominantly dark or predominantly light values in your composition. This one ends up being predominantly light. To make sure that you have a strong focal point and a strong emphasis. Remember that having that 60% light or dark in your composition developed through your thumbnail will help make that compositional balance between light and dark really strong and interesting. Next, I want you to think about something I've mentioned before, especially if you were listening to my webinar that led up to this class. Remember that I advocate super strongly that you mix your colors before you begin to paint. Whether you're working in black and white or you're working in color, mix the paint before you start. And if you're working fairly small, like a 5x7, a 4x6, and a 6x8, then having roughly a quarter size daub of that paint value and color mixed up is going to serve you well. If you run out of paint, leave a little bit of it on the palette so that you can adjust the color and match closely what you have. So it's super important to mix your colors ahead of time. The key to being able to paint fluidly is to have all of your color out and pre-mixed. It'll help you limit your palette and make sure that you have a definite color scheme. Now, we haven't talked about color schemes yet. We're really just working off of local color this time if you want to jump in and try some color, because we're going to have a little bit of color in the demonstration for this one. So you can work with a simple basic color palette, but you need to establish that before anything touches the canvas or the panel. So to get started, decide what the main values of colors are and mix that paint. Just like when we did with our thumbnail, try to shoot for 3 to 5 values and 5 to 7 shapes. If you're working in black and white, mix 5 values that range from white to black. So you would have white, black, middle gray, a light gray, and a dark gray. That way you're not having to stop and think about, are these far enough apart in value? You can just get into the flow of painting and make paint. If you're working in color, again, determine what the main colors are and assign one for each of those 5 to 7 shapes and mix those up. Once you have those mixed, then mix 3 values of each of those colors and make sure they're distinct in value, that their contrast in value is slightly exaggerated. Be sure not to dull your colors too much as you lighten or darken them. Lighten your colors with an equally intense lighter hue and darken your colors with an equally intense darker hue. Once you have mixed your colors, then you're going to lay in the Notan. If you're working in black and white, then lay that Notan in black. Only use black if you are working in a grayscale or gray value painting. If you're working in color, put that black aside and hide it from yourself. I don't want you to use it when you're working with color at all. So if you're working in black and white, go on and lay the Notan in black and white. But if you're working in color, then you need to use the dominant shadow color in order to establish where those basic dark shapes are. In this particular painting, I was working with ultramarine blue as the underlying color because I had painted it in wintertime when the shadow colors here in South Carolina are really blue. So I wanted a blue underneath to pull the whole composition together. Establishing the Notan first and remembering that it's not all going to show in the final painting. And using that dominant color helps to add unity to the composition. Little bits of it will show through even when I apply lighter values on top of it. So the fact that it's touching three sides of the picture plane and that it's working the whole picture plane at one time means that that's going to lead to a unified composition. So get that Notan laid in. Once you have laid in the Notan, then you're going to work to establish those main shapes. Think back to that thumbnail study. And what you're going to do is to block in those 5 to 7 basic shapes that you identified in your thumbnail. Lay in the initial value and color statement with either a large brush or a knife. Don't use a little finicky number 2 paintbrush. And I will see if you do. I'll know it if you've got it in your hand. I'll be able to tell from the kind of marks that I see in the paintings if you've used a brush that's too small or a little tiny knife. So use the big tool. One reason is you'll cover those areas quickly, and using the big tool will keep you from going into making lots of little details. As you make marks, the paint will skip at times. Leave those in. They add interest to the surface of the painting. So you're not going to try to paint each leaf in the trees, each blade of grass. When I'm teaching photography, I call those foliage shots, playing off of the word foliage. When you have too much foliage in an image, and you get too caught up in the details of grass and individual leaves, the whole painting or the photograph will fall apart. So the purpose of working and blocking in and looking at those main shapes is to prevent that from happening. So when you look at this initial block in, you don't see details. In fact, you don't see any details. And you only see 4 different colors. In the sky, I went on and did some blending. So you see 2 values in the sky. It's going from light at the horizon line to a little bit darker blue at the top. So I actually have 5 colors. But it's very, very simple. One of the things I want you to see here is how much recognizable space gets created simply with using 5 values, simply with using a limited number of colors. Some people stop there. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. The degree to which you bring it up to realistic representation is completely up to you. But if you use this process, you've got choices at each step along the way, so you can decide how representational it's going to be. And the process is not taking it over, or the act of painting is not taking it over from you. You're in control the whole time. So work from background to foreground, dark to light, apply 1 color and value for each shape, and keep the paint thin in that initial block in so that you can establish and apply more layers. This paint is super thin. If you look at the blue in the background on that line of trees, you can actually see some of the panel showing through. So make it thin. This is not the time to apply thick paint yet. Keep it thin. Thinner than you think it needs to be is the way to go. One of the things I want you to remember as you start developing it further is that you need to not work from left to right or top to bottom, you need to work over the whole picture plane at the same time. So the last stage there is to adjust and develop the color and the value to the degree of representation that you want. So remember again, I can't emphasize this enough. Don't start on the left-hand side and work to the right. Don't start at the top and work to the bottom and work in great detail from the very beginning. What happens when people do that instead of blocking in is that they have a different painting when they finish than they started with, a different style. Because especially if you're working large, if you start in one corner and finish in the opposite corner, then you will have transformed or transitioned from one style to another as you work, because people rarely maintain exactly the same marking system working large when they start in one place and go to another, or from day to day. But if you work on it over the whole picture plane at one time, there'll be unity of mark making as well as unity of color. So at this stage of adjusting, go back into each shape, add variation in value and hue, break them down into different values. That's where you take the 3 values of the color that you mixed, of that main color for the shape, and you apply those 3 different values. It takes many less values than you think to begin to establish a sense of space. 3 is more than enough. Don't mix more than 3 values of each of those main colors. Allow for variation in thickness and thinness of the paint that adds visual interest to the painting. And remember, since the process moves from general to specific, you can easily move between loose abstraction and a more painterly realism. You can actually get as tightly photographic as you wish. So this is not about becoming an abstract painter. It is about gaining control over the degree of representation that you're going to use, gaining control over the whole picture plane. So as we think about what we've covered today, I want to run through that one more time. These are the steps that we're working with. Practice that art of seeing. Really look at your subject. Look long and hard before you even make a mark in your sketchbook. Make a thumbnail that has 3 to 5 values and 5 to 7 shapes. That's going to be the basis of everything else that you're working with. From that thumbnail, make a notan where you assign all the middle grays to either black or white. Then mix your colors. You want to mix those before you begin painting. Remember, lots and lots of very well-known painters advocate doing that. Whistler would not allow his students to begin a painting until they'd mixed all their colors first, because it allows you to work in the flow of painting rather than trying to make color decisions as you're working. Then lay the notan into the panel or canvas that you're working on. Establish those basic notan shapes. As much as possible, avoid drawing on the panel first with charcoal or pencil. If you need to establish some guidelines, remember the process that we used in the last module. Make small dots of color and roughly block in where that notan goes with your knife or your brush. But do not draw. Establish the main shapes. So assign one color and one value to each of the main shapes and use very flat color to lay that in. Use the big brush or the big knife. No small knives and no small brushes there. Keep the tool that you're using large, and it'll help you very fast, very quickly establish those main shapes. Last but not least, adjust and develop the colors and values to give you the degree of representation and realism that you want in the painting. I hope this has been helpful, and what I want you to do after you've watched the video is to select the image that you're going to work from. I'd like for you to work from a photograph rather than direct observation for this one, just because the first time you use this process, it will give you a little bit more control. So you may work with the same photo that you used in Module 1 and 2, or go back to the module that has those photos in it and select a second one. If you have another photo of your own that you would like to work with, that's fine as well. But again, I would go through the entire process that we've been using of trying multiple formats, varying where the focal point is, working through several Notans to pick out the one that is the best composition. So you're comfortable with the composition before you ever start painting. I'll be back shortly with the demo, and you'll get to watch me work through this exact same process that we've outlined here. Happy painting!